योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि. So we are dealing with these two sutras, that is 15 and 16 of the Samadhipada. Now, these two sutras discuss two types of detachment. How this detachment helps us to get out of this trap of vrittis, our natural accumulated tendencies, impressions, which really constitutes our character and which determine how we respond to different situations, not only from external world, and how react to the world outside. In a way, what we call the subtle personality, which in Vedanta consists of 7 elements. The most essential ingredients of this internal organs or character, Antahkarana as we call it, the intellect and mind, the ego system and the discriminative faculty. How our mind reacts, how our intellect decides, how we identify ourselves with different experiences within and without, and how these experiences remain accumulated in the form of memories. All these together constitute the essence of our subtle personality. The gross personality is common. Human beings, human body, its basic structure is uniform. In fact, there are two aspects of our personality which are uniform. One, the real personality, the Atman, the same in all of us. Just as if we have got 1,000 pots filled with water, these 1,000 pots reflect the sun in a more or less uniform, identical manner. So the sun is the same, and the reflections are also more or less identical. But the shape of the pot in which the water is kept, the size, and the quality of water, whether it is muddy water, dirty water, clean water, all these may differ. So let us say the 8 billion human beings are 8 billion pots and pans of different sizes, various shapes and sizes. But then the water also is different in terms of quality. But the sun is the same, and the fact of it being just a reflection is also the same. So physical body, biologically, more or less, there is some kind of a uniformity. If you have got 5 fingers in the left hand, it is an exception. Normally, human being is only, if you have more than 5 fingers, it's a little bit of humor. I was perhaps testing whether you are really listening carefully or not, So, if you have got 6 fingers, an exception. 5 fingers common. 2 hands, 2 legs, 1 head, all common. 2 eyes, everything. So that at the physical level, there is perfect democracy and egalitarianism. So at the spiritual level, Atman is the same in all of us, the self, the soul. Then where is the difference? The manifestation of this Atman within differs from person to person. So 8 billion different types of manifestation. And what determines the difference? This character, a person, our internal personality, subtle personality, not the gross personality. And this gross personality in Vedanta consists of 17 ingredients, of which the most important ones are Mana, Buddhi, Chitta and Ahankara in Sanskrit, mind. How we react to different experiences at the emotional level, positive and negative responses. Then the deciding faculty. I gave this example many times. Suppose you see an object in front of you, but there is not enough light. Actually, it is a iron post, but you mistake it to be the form of a human being because there is not enough light. So your mind is speculating whether it's a human being or something else. You reach the objects and you decide it is an iron post. So intellect decides. Then suddenly you remember, well, I have seen this object last week or 10 years back or maybe in the morning. So that memory is accumulated. It's called chittam. These are all 4 compartments of the mental system. And then you identify yourself as the one who has seen this object last week. So these 4 compartments. Now how do they express, how do they function? With the help of the 5 senses of perception, the motor organs, the sensory organs, 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action, and of course the vital energy, what we call prana, and the Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 elements which constitute the gross aspects of the human body. So these are the external, the outer shells through which the subtle personality functions. That's the main reason, why an individual is different from another individual. Why 8 billion people are different one from the other. 8 billion different ways in which they respond to life or situations. 8 billion methods in which they execute a common work, a common task. 8 billion different methods, different ways of reacting to external situations and circumstances, which means 8 million characters. Now, these 8 billion, let us say, subtle human personalities. Now, the point is, these differ from individual to individual. So, the Atman is common in all of us. The physical dimension is more or less identical or uniform. But the way in which this Atman expresses itself as our character functions through these channels with the help of these tools or instruments makes the difference between person to person. So that is central point. Now the question arises. These differences are due to different formations of different vrittis, vasanas, samskaras, impressions that we have gathered which constitute our character. So how to get out of this trap? So Patanjali says there is only one method, that is the practice of detachment, constant, continuous, unbroken practice of detachment. So the word used is vairagyam, it is called. So I mentioned this many times. The word vairagyam should not be understood in its purely literal sense. If you look at the dictionary, you will get a very, very simple meaning which in a way has very little to do with the meaning, the implication in which the word is used in the Patanjali system. That's a very important point to remember. That will take me to some of the fundamental principles of what you call Hindu hermeneutics. Because this is a subject we may have to discuss again and again. So I shall say a few things about the Hindu hermeneutics, philosophical perspective and also philological perspective. This is not very frequently studied because these subtle principles are taught through teacher-student succession of great Rishi tradition. So in language as a whole, you have to remember, in Sanskrit language, there are 4 ways of interpreting words. Are you interested in this subject? That will take us completely out of the context of yoga. But it's something very interesting. It has its own, it's a very interesting subject. It's not really found anywhere because all these, Sanskrit philology reached its present level of perfection in 19th century BC. You have to remember that. Now, in language as a whole, there is a permanent school of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, Vyakhyana Shastram is Sanskrit, means the science of interpreting scriptures. So in Augustine Aquinas, in Christian biblical hermeneutics, they have got certain well-defined structures and definitions. Sanskrit hermeneutics is more general. So the science of interpreting not only scriptures but also language, spoken word, written word, which could be used either in theology or in philosophy and grammar. So according to one approach is, according to the Sanskrit grammarians, one approach is every word has got a very explicit meaning. See, suppose you call a person, you are a musician. There, it's not his proper name, but the word implies what he does. You don't call a wrestler a musician. So you call he's a musician. It's not a proper name, but it's a name that you use. You don't know his proper name, but you use that word to identify him maybe from people of another profession. He is not the gardener, but he's a musician. So the word is used to imply the profession that he is engaged in. It's very explicit. Now in Sanskrit there is a gayaka means with Sanskrit, means the one who ganam karoti gayaka, means the one who sings, the musician. There is another word sukumara. Literal meaning is a very beautiful looking person. But every mother or father will give his or her child a name and may give the name Sukumara, which may have nothing to do with the physical look. Maybe the opposite of it, maybe. At least for public, not for the parents, of course. So Sukumara is the name that is given to a person. But it's just the opposite of what Sukumara, the word implies. Could be different. Then there is another, I'm giving an example. Then there is another way of interpreting word. So in Sanskrit there is a word, it is called Vishnu. Vishnu is the name of a deity, one of the Hindu trinity, the one who is responsible for preservation, protection, etc. But the literal meaning of the word Vishnu is Vyapakatvad Vishnu, Sarva Vyapitvad Vishnu. The one who is all-pervading is Vishnu. Now, if you use the word Vishnu, you don't use the word to call air, which is all-pervading. The word Vishnu can be used only to denote a deity, though the literal meaning could be anything that is all-pervading. Means Vyapakatva, that is all-pervading. Air is all-pervading. You don't call air Vishnu. The word Vishnu means only the deity. So sometimes the meaning of the person may not imply all that that particular word literally implies. It could be the opposite also, as in the case of Sukumara. Not a person who may not do justice to the meaning of the word. Maybe there's the opposite of it. Maybe called a name. See, Gauranga is a name, which means a person who is the golden colored or fair looking, so to speak, in general way. But it may not be like that. So the opposite may be the meaning of the word that is used. Now, what I'm going to drive home is, so this is a big subject. Hindu hermeneutics is a very big subject. So in language, there is one school of hermeneutics. In philosophy also, there is another school of hermeneutics. All these six systems of Indian philosophy, and also the six agnostic systems and atheistic systems, the four schools of Buddhism, and the six theistic systems like Yoga, Sankhya, Vedanta, Puranic, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, all these different schools of Indian, orthodox schools of Indian philosophy have got their own schools of hermeneutics. So in the yoga vocabulary, words have got a definite meaning. Vritti, as used in the Patanjali system, is totally different from the sense in which that particular word may be used in other philosophical system or in language in general. So that's the point I'm trying to drive home. So the point, what I want to tell you here is, the word vairagyam is translated into the English word detachment, but really speaking, it is much more than that. Here, what it means is, mentally, you identify yourself as something other than what the word implies. So the dispassion, detachment, these are some of the words used. So how to get out of this trap of vrittis, vasanas, samskaras, accumulated impressions and tendencies, which we feel stand in our way of doing what we want to do. We stand in the way of our starting a new life. We stand in the way of our trying to meditate or pray, because for the first time we are trying to meditate or pray, or even to read a holy scripture. You go to a library, you take a decision, I shall read my Bible or Gita or Saint Augustine, or maybe Buddha's teaching in Dhammapada, whatever it is. You go to a library and you want to take a book and read it. You reach the library, you look at the shelf, you see all these books lined up in front of you, but your mind doesn't cooperate. You suddenly go in search of something else which you are accustomed to reading. So your mind doesn't permit you to do what you want to do. That's the trap of vrittis, accumulated tendencies, impressions, and samskaras, which constitute a solid character. So how to get out of this? So Patanjali uses vairagya. So here vairagya is a positive spiritual quality. That means you should be able to detach yourself from this trap of undesirable tendencies and impressions, which constitute certain aspects of our character which we feel are not good for us, which we want to get out of. And that should be practiced repeatedly. That is abhyasa vairagyabhyam tat nirodha. So we can get out of this stranglehold, this trap of vrittis, by the repeated practice of detachment. Means looking at them not as participants but as witnesses. We don't antagonize when an unhealthy thought emerges in the mind, and we don't befriend them either. We practice a kind of detachment. And this should be practiced continuously. So all these are explained in the 12th, 13th, 14th Sutra. So in the 15th and 16th Sutra, two levels of this detachment are explained. Two levels. First, in the 15th Sutra, what is called Aparavairagya, means the secondary, the first step. Secondary means the first step. How to enter the path of this detachment, practicing dispassion. So I already explained here. Drishta anusravika vishaya vidrishnasya vashikara-samya vairagyam. So a particular kind of detachment or vairagyam is defined here. It is called abhara, means it is secondary, not the supreme. In the coming sutra, in the next sutra, a higher kind of detachment will be explained. So here, Vashikara, that's the name of this Vairagya, means Vashikara is the first step. What is that? Practicing a kind of dispassion. You try to reduce the craving, the thirst. I mean, you are still in the process of developing this. I already explained. Practicing the 5 disciplines. Maitri, Karuna, Mudhita, Upeksha. You already mentioned here. This Maitri means friendship. Friendship towards higher values. Then compassion towards spiritual seekers who are perhaps in need of our help, and be friendly with them, rather associating in a very healthy, positive manner with other spiritual seekers. That is the basic principle of congregation. It means if spiritual seekers themselves can discuss among them spiritual topics, that's very healthy, very helpful. On the one hand, it creates a healthy vibration in the place where we discuss these subjects. Secondly, our mind will constantly dwell on those ideas, those concepts which are healthy and helpful for spiritual life. So, friendship and also compassion. Then also when you find spiritual seekers more advanced than you, be happy about it. And then complete indifference towards those people whose association may shake our faith, may fill our mind with skepticism or doubt, or pouring cold water. That's at the beginning of spiritual life. This is important. Sri Ramakrishna refers to this in a very illustrative example. If you are planting a seed, when it becomes a sprout, at the beginning, you have to erect a fence around it. Otherwise, cattle, goats, other wild animals may come and eat it up. You may have to pour water, you may have to remove the weeds and grass around for some time. When this plant becomes a tree, then you don't have to worry about it. Then you don't have to take any measure to protect from wild animals. So, like that, at the beginning of spiritual life, when we practice this first stage of detachment, when we are trying to meditate, when we are trying to pray, when we are trying to advance in spiritual life, when we face conflicts due to maybe some accumulated unhealthy tendencies, impressions coming, maybe not from this life, maybe from previous life, then we should strengthen our defenses. We can strengthen our defenses by reinforcing our identification with the higher idea. So, practicing detachment means identifying ourselves with a higher ideal. We should not try to fight against an unhealthy idea. Rather, we must try to identify ourselves with a healthy idea. I mean, instead of making deliberate effort to move away from the East, what you should do, you should consciously try to move towards the West. Then automatically, we will be moving away from the East. So instead of confronting unhealthy ideas, we must focus on healthy ideas. So that's the first stage of dispassion, practice of detachment. Now, very frequently, what happens, we may sometimes, In some books you find in old age, due to old age, due to sickness, due to physical inability, people may develop a kind of detachment. It doesn't really help in spiritual life. That's an important point, remember. Because the lower or unhealthy characteristics and tendencies get only weakened when we become old. They do not lose their ability to manifest, but rather their ability to function as active force gets weakened. So without spiritual practice of detachment, that is moving towards a higher value, higher ideal, we won't be able to transcend the tyranny of unhealthy tendencies and impressions. So you find if you read the writings of, say, most visible, most clear-cut descriptions of this you find in the Saint Teresa of Avila's autobiography. She refers to these problems. But frequently these problems are given an anthropomorphic interpretation. It is the devil's temptation. Devil hiding somewhere trying to tempt you. That's how all these negative impressions springing in our mind are interpreted. That's because of the Abrahamic theological background. Those problems are interpreted by Patanjali in a very scientific, rational, psychological manner. He says, these are the tendencies that come from another source, and they can be neutralized by developing counter tendencies, the opposite tendencies. If a person is greedy, if a person is stingy, then he can perhaps practice the idea, well, money doesn't bring happiness. Money doesn't guarantee any kind of permanent happiness or enjoyment or delight. So that can be practiced. So, and the richest men are not the happiest. So many of these ideas can be practiced. That's why Pratipaksha Bhavanam, that Patanjali will discuss this subject later. When an opposite or unhealthy tendency emerges in the mind, we can weaken or even neutralize that unhealthy tendency by erecting a defense in our mental system, by focusing on the truth that helps us to get out of that temptation or that extreme desire for those things or attachment towards those tendencies. So that's an important point, remember. So we have to transcend these unhealthy tendencies, not evading but transcending. That's why it is said deliberate spiritual effort is necessary to transcend. According to Yoga and Vedanta system, if we do not make deliberate effort through spiritual practice to transcend and completely get out of this trap, we will inherit those tendencies when we are born again. That's what Vedanta says. Old age doesn't guarantee spiritual progress or even spiritual maturity. One can and one should try to achieve this higher spiritual faculty. One should practice these higher disciplines even when you are physically young or healthy at least. I mean, even you are young, you are capable of practicing all this. That's an important point, remember. We are now going to discuss with the 16th Sutra. That's a topic for discussion today. So, please note, please remember 16th Sutra. Tatparam Purushakhyadehi Gunavaitrushnim. So, to understand this sutra, we must keep in mind the fundamental characteristics of the previous sutra. This particular sutra, 16th Sutra, says that when we practice this higher discrimination or higher detachment or this dispassion, then what happens? Even the tendency, even the natural instinct of the human mind to be tempted by external worldly pleasures itself gets completely wiped out. So the example is given. The previous sutra says that through constant effort, you can make your unhealthy tendencies non-functional through the practice of dispassion. That means your thirst for external objects, sensory pleasures, gets completely weakened through discrimination. That is fine. It's like seeds that are kept somewhere in a place where there is not enough fertile soil or water or manure that will help the seed to sprout. But the seed should be burned, and that's the function of the higher dispassion explained in the next sutra. So the 16th Sutra says, when you get this higher knowledge, the knowledge of Purusha, the knowledge of the Atman, then what happens? Our tendencies, natural instincts for worldly enjoyments gets completely burned, like seeds get completely burned. So if you burn the seed or if you fry the seed modern times, let's say, but the Vyasas uses you burn the seed, then if you put it somewhere in fertile soil, it will not sprout. So when you reach a higher level of discrimination, dispassion or detachment, it's called Paravairagya. There's a Guna Vaitrushnya, means that even the natural characteristics of the mind towards these sensory enjoyments get completely wiped out. Just like seeds get completely burned and then the seeds cannot sprout again. That is the subject in the next sutra. So in the commentary of the next sutra, Swami Vivekananda refers to some of the fundamentals of Sankhya philosophy. So maybe I can give an explanation of this Purusha Khyati he mentioned here. So first, you should remember, this particular Vairagya or dispassion leads to an experience called Samprajnata Samadhi or Samprajnata Yoga, which is going to be discussed in the 17th Sutra. So, Samprajnata Yoga, what is that? Samprajnata Yoga means the ability to concentrate on different material objects in isolation so that we will be able to get special mental powers which transcend the powers of ordinary mental exertion. Now coming to the 17th Sutra. So I am giving a bird view of what we have discussed so far. 5 vrittis, that is Pramana, Viparya, Vikalpa, Nidda, Spurudha. I have already discussed. You can read again or you can just listen again. The natural tendencies, the after effects, the residual elements of whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we speak, any action, conscious action that we do, will leave in our mind, a mental system, a residual factor which remains registered, and this never gets destroyed unless we practice this dispassion or detachment. Natural tendencies. These tendencies actually constitute the essence of our character and our behavior, our whole living of way of life. They are 5-fold, I already explained. they include not only what we perceive, what we understand consciously. It's called pramana. This is already being explained, so I'm just giving a reintroduction before entering the subject of Samprajnata Samadhi. It's an important theme. So now, these tendencies can be accumulated not only through conscious actions, but also through dreams, through memories, even through words that we speak, that we hear, objects that we see unconsciously. All these experiences can create a residual impact in our mental system. That impact is called vritti. These vrittis become more and more subtle, and they become samskaras. Samskaras are strong accumulated tendencies which everyone has got. These samskaras become vasanas. What is vasana? I shall explain. It's a Sanskrit word. See, a boy or a girl born in a musician's family may have listened to music right from early days, may show a tendency, natural inborn tendency to learn music. When this tendency is seen in a different family where there is no tradition of musical practice, you suddenly come across such cases. Then, according to the Yoga Vedanta system, this tendency comes from previous life. That means without any action or experience behind, becoming a vritti and samskara, you cannot have a vasana. So vasana is a strong tendency which is oriented towards repetition of the same experience or action. Now, many of these tendencies are not helpful. Rather, these tendencies become a great challenge. If we could control our tendencies and impressions, then life will be very simple. Life can be dangerous also. There are evil people with evil tendencies. If they can have full control over their actions, it will be much worse for the world. So it could be both ways. That's why forgetfulness is also a blessing. Memory is also a blessing. Sometimes dullness, incapacity is also a blessing in some cases. Whatever it is, the point is, these tendencies become our character. And this determines how we behave towards external world and how we behave towards our own inner experiences like hunger, thirst, and so on. As I mentioned, they are not always healthy. Some of those tendencies are those which we want to come out of, which create serious problems. So how to get out of these unhealthy tendencies? We have to practice dispassion or detachment. And we have to practice this continuously. Okay. Now, what is the meaning of the detachment or dispassion? The first stage of practicing dispassion or detachment is we must reduce and get out of a craving, thirst for doing or experiencing unhealthy events, unhealthy experiences. Our natural tendency to do unhealthy things, unhealthy actions, or speak unhealthy words, or experience unhealthy experiences should be reduced through the practice of detachment or discrimination. When they emerge in the mind, we should not act out, we should not immediately work out. Rather, we must sit quiet and watch how these thoughts emerge in our mind. We should not antagonize, recognizing that they are not good for us. We should not fight them. And also, we should never befriend them. Any kind of contact, either by befriending or antagonizing, can have the effect of being hooked into, trapped into the influence of that unhealthy tendency. So what to do? Total indifference. We have to look upon those tendencies as guests who are not welcome, but we don't want to drive them out. That's all. Oh, you are a bad thought, all right, you remain there, no problem. You also sit and meditate like me, if you can. You should not go away, no, you should not do that. But rather, the evil effect of unhealthy thoughts can be reduced by turning the mind towards something positive, negative, by giving the mind a healthy orientation. Bad tendencies can be reduced, the intensity or the ability to manifest in the form of action can be reduced by developing a counter tendency which is good, healthy, and spiritually helpful. This is how to practice detachment. The first stage of detachment is called Vashikara-Vairagya. It's kind of detachment, dispassion. First stage. But remember, here we don't completely remove the seeds or distant possibility of these unhealthy tendencies re-emerging in future. There's always a chance that they may emerge. That's why in spiritual life we find in the lives of many saints who have led who did a lot of spiritual practice in the early days. But then sometimes even when they get old at some stage, there is a deviation which happens. So how do you explain this? It doesn't mean that they are completely lost. What they have gained through meditation, prayer in this life will remain a spiritual capital. And that will help them to continue the spiritual journey onward in the next life. But sometimes there is a deviation. That could happen. But the strength of previous practices can always come to a rescue. So maybe one of the most graphic illustration of this phenomenon is found in a story in the Bhagavata Purana. It's again a classic. It's a Mahabharata. You have to remember hundreds of characters, no, thousands of characters. You have to remember 145,000 verses in the larger version. And Bhagavata Purana is a very, so these great mythological books are, endless reservoir. It is a repository of great spiritual stories and messages. So there's one story which bring out the both healthy and unhealthy tendencies of previous actions. So how vrittis sometimes get trapped, and how sometimes healthy tendencies generated in early part of our life sometimes come to our rescue. So story of it's called Ajamila Vakyanami, the story of a spiritual seeker. He was a spiritual seeker. He was born in a pious family. He was brought up as a God-fearing devotee, and he did a lot of meditation and all that. But then as he became a young man, there was complete deviation. There was a great fall in his life. He completely deviated from his spiritual life, and he became a profligate, a curse for his family and also the society as a whole. So I don't want to go to details of what happened to him. Anyway, so finally the time came for him to die. So as I mentioned, he ignored and ill-treated his own parents, his own teachers, left his home, joined a company of unhealthy associations, lost his track, and then he got old, and the time came for him to leave this world, his body. And then the story goes, suddenly he felt his helplessness when the moment for death came, and he remembered the name of his eldest son. The eldest son's name was Narayana. Narayana is the name of a deity. It's a holy name that people, Hindus, chant with great devotion, even now, millions of them. the name, which is one of the synonyms of Lord Vishnu. The literal meaning of Narayana is Narayanam Ayanam Yasya, means the ultimate destination of human existence. That's the literal meaning of the word, Narayana. Many people don't know. Ayana means Gati, means the destination. The final destination of human life is God, or let us say realization of Atman, according to Vedanta. So that's the meaning of it. Anyway, he uttered that name. He didn't think about God or anything. He was thinking about his eldest son. Because when his eldest son was born, he was a God-fearing man, so he gave him the name of Lord Narayana, a synonym of Lord Vishnu, God, incarnation of God. But immediately what happened, in a flash of thought, his mind went back to his early days when he used to utter the same sacred name with great devotion in his temple or in his shrine. He used to meditate chanting this holy name when he was a young man, before the great deviation occurred in his life. That's because of the power of vrittis, samskaras, healthy samskaras, which suddenly came to his rescue. People who don't have anything to fall back upon, to think, well, I have done something wonderful, I have done something meaningful. The last moment, death is a terrible, scary experience. So that was his condition. He suddenly, when senses are weak, mind is weak, suddenly all the memories of his evil deeds sprang up in his mind. And he uttered the name of his eldest son. We don't know whether he came to his side or not. But his eldest son's name was also the synonym of Vishnu, a deity whose holy name he used to recite with great devotion as a young man, before the great deviation came in his life, before he became a profligate. So what happened, that sudden thought filled his mind with the memories of vrittis of his early life. At that time, the story goes, no mythology begins, the angels of God came and took him to heaven. That's it. The story continues. So what we had to focus on in this particular context is, anyone who does some spiritual practice with great intensity and devotion, even for some time, will generate a great spiritual capital. And depending upon the intensity with which we practice those spiritual disciplines, the spiritual capital also will be more effective and be strong, and it re-emerged in his mind, and his life ended in a blissful experience. So, what I mean to say, the unhealthy tendencies, unhealthy vrittis can be countered by generating healthy tendencies, healthy vrittis, healthy samskaras, healthy vasanas. And also through the practice of detachment. There are two methods of practice, of countering the onslaught of unhealthy tendencies that may emerge in our mind. So we'll continue discussion in the next session. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Now we'll have interaction. Okay. We have just about 10 minutes.
You have spoken of the Atman. What is the definition within Vedantic philosophy of the spirit?
Spirit.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the spirit is an English word that is frequently used to translate the word Atman. Soul, self, and spirit, consciousness. All these are used depending upon the type of authors we use. But self with capital letter, yes, soul also with capital letter. Sometimes spirit is used with to imply Atman. But yoga philosophy doesn't postulate the idea of Atman. According to yoga philosophy, which borrows its philosophy from Sankhya system, there are two fundamental categories, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha, in a way, shares some of the characteristics of Atman. Purusha is self-effulgent, it is conscious, it is awareness. But there's a basic difference because yoga philosophy is a school of dualism, not non-dualism. It's a dualistic philosophy. Two fundamental categories, eternal, different, and fundamental categories. But non-dualism postulates only one fundamental, absolute category. The rest, relative. This idea.
Swamiji, so does remembrance of God count as vairagya? Is that
Remembrance of God?
of God? Does that count as dispassion as vairagya?
Yeah. Remembrance of God will neutralize the negative vrittis and tendencies, just as dispassion or detachment does. See, yoga philosophy is not purely theistic. Then the illustration is from a book of devotional philosophy. But the main focus was the impact of vrittis, but that's what I was trying to emphasize. So remembrance of God is actually much more powerful, much more effective for a devotee, because it practically does the work much more effectively. Dispassion, detachment is a gradual process. That's why you have to remember yoga philosophy is not atheistic, but it is not theistic in the sense that Bhagavata Purana or devotion philosophies are theistic. It speaks about God, but so-called God is an elevated being. That's the yoga idea of a celestial entity, not God.
The Buddhists speak of grasping with the hand, grasping life. So how does the mind grasp?
Excuse me, could you repeat once more?
Well, in the Buddhist tradition, there's grasping, there's holding on.
Yeah.
And this can cause, unfortunately, suffering with the attachment.
Yeah.
So the mind has a mechanism where it grasps.
Yeah.
Now, is this insecurity? Is this spiritual immaturity?
Yeah. Grasping becomes a cause of this continuous cycle of life and death and rebirth, which Buddhists call a praditya samutpada, dependent origination. 12 links together. The central element is trishna or desire, which this clinging to desire, clinging to life, clinging for enjoyment. So that clinging is what is called gasping. Clinging. That's the cause of all grief. And that's why all the eightfold path, which constitute the path of liberation or nirvana, emphasize on coming out of this clinging. It is a kind of attachment. So once we get out of this trap of desire, what they call trishna in Pali, we get out of this rotating cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Yeah, attachment to life itself is a very important cause for grief in Buddhist tradition. Attachment to life, it manifests in this, this 12-link pratitya samutpada, it is called, which the basis is trishna, and also clinging to life, clinging for action, clinging for desire, clinging for being born, and so on, all that. That's the thing. Once you get out of this trap of trishna, then there is nothing more. There is no more desire to be born again, desire to enjoy, desire to go through these life cycles. It's idea. So, okay, thank you for. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna